Fresh meat.
Today isn't about defending a black sheep in a series or discussing a top foreign horror film. It's not about the history of horror in video games or about finding out what the F happened to a particular horror film. Today's just talking about a great horror movie for the sake of letting it be great. The anthology film is most certainly a flawed genre for horror, but you know what? It's also 100% one of my all-time favorites. Most of the time, anthologies are pieced together from various short stories with anywhere from 3 to 6 mini-films woven together, though it can just be split into 2 or even stretched into more segments. There's also typically a wraparound story that has some sort of relation to the other tales, even if it's just done in a minimalist way, like how beautifully the first VHS film did it, with someone discovering the tapes with the stories therein. These anthology films are also sometimes called portmanteau films, and while they aren't all expressly horror, they have lived in that realm for the longest and certainly had the biggest impact there. Some of my personal favorites are from the studio Amicus, who is a rival to Hammer, and excelled at these type of movies. Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror were staples for me growing up, and I fondly revisit them today. There are just way too many to name, and even just rattling off all the good ones is a Herculean task. But for those interested, check out Severin Films' amazing documentary Tales of the Uncanny for the definitive look at the subgenre.
Nice hearing from you, Carlos.
I want to thank you guys for watching Revisited, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click the bell so you can get notified each time a new video goes up. Now, back to the show. Now, is Tales from the Darkside the best anthology film of all time? In a word, no. It does, however, cover a very few important bases. First and foremost, it is one of the few TV shows that got a theatrically released movie that may actually be better than the show. The show Tales from the Darkside was the brainchild of George A. Romero, who in 1982 gave us one of the absolute best anthology films of all time with Creepshow. Creepshow would do the reverse of what we discussed and get a TV show after its movie. Well after, in fact. And while it also had 2 sequels, 3 is so terrible that this film is widely considered a sort of Creepshow 3. Anyway, Tales from the Darkside the show ran for 4 years, is easily available on an inexpensive DVD set, and has the only opening credits theme that still gives me both the heebies and the jeebies. I'll let my favorite reminiscer of all shows horror, Nikki, take you through the television iteration on our Horror TV Shows We Miss episode on it. Another unique thing about this movie is that very rarely are all the stories in an anthology movie good. Now you could say that it only has 3 stories plus the wraparound, and that gives it less stories to end up bad, but I say that means you have to really nail the 3 you got. They start with the writing. All 3 stories have a certain pedigree going. Lot 249 is adapted from a short story from Sherlock Holmes creator Arthur Conan Doyle by Michael McDowell, who is a well-traveled scribe himself. He wrote episodes of the Darkside TV series, as well as other popular 80s and 90s anthology shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Amazing Stories, Tales from the Crypt, and Monsters. He also wrote the story for Beetlejuice and Stephen King's Thinner. McDowell would also pen the 3rd segment, Lover's Vow, but sadly would pass away in 1999 at the age of 49. The middle segment comes from the 2 heavyweights of the film, with Stephen King having the original short story, The Cat from Hell, adapted by his good friend George Romero. Not only was this a return home of sorts for Romero, with him coming back to the series he created, while also reuniting with King for an anthology for the first time since the previously mentioned classic Creepshow. Add in K&B, who worked on the effects, and the family tree goes even deeper with parts of this team doing projects for Romero, or their teachers like Savini doing the effects for the original Creepshow. I don't know how else to say this is the true 3rd film. The director was another journeyman in John Harrison. Harrison also floated around anthology shows like Tales from the Darkside and Tales from the Crypt, while also directing the Dune miniseries in 2000. While he doesn't have a long list of work, his most recent credits are 6 episodes of, what do you know, the Creepshow TV series. His direction of the film does a good job of walking a fine line between TV series and movie, while having the perfect amount of high-level production value that add a sheen to the movie. Exactly what the show deserved, but could never afford. The talent in front of the camera is a mix of, at the time, veteran and popular actors, with some up-and-comers that would have careers 30 years after the initial release. Lot 249 has Christian Slater and an incredibly young Julianne Moore as siblings, with Steve Buscemi as a rival student at college who has the hots for Moore. The main story revolves around Moore's boyfriend getting Buscemi in trouble long enough for him to lose an important credential at the college. Buscemi has an eye for antiques, and Lot 249 has a special guest that he will use to enact his revenge. Oftentimes in the show, the episodes would have a twist, or certain characters would meet their end from a special comeuppance, but the movie has a much bigger budget and wanted to earn its R rating. The effects from K&B shine throughout the entire film, but their work in this segment is what stands out the most to me, and vibe most with the style that they're going for. At its heart, along with Tales from the Crypt and Creepshow, this is a modern iteration of the old EC comics so many of these creators grew up loving and attempting to hide from their parents. In those, as in the segments here, the deaths were just brutal. In Lot 249, one of the characters gets their brain pulled out through his nose with a coat hanger, while another gets slashed open and stuffed with flowers and spices. Both of these events are set up by another character when explaining that this stuff happened during the mummification. This story also ends the most like one of these comics, with Christian Slater's character getting killed off screen after he thinks he has won, only to realize he was tricked by the story's true villain. Mess with a history nerd at your own risk.
Couldn't distinguish a Third Dynasty sacred scroll from a piece of post-Alexandrine pictogram porn.
The second story may lack the star power, but it has some fun and nuanced, at least at first, performances from William Hickey and David Johansen. Johansen may be better known as Buster Poindexter, and lead singer of the New York Dolls, with his most remembered performance probably being the Ghost of Christmas Past from the best version of Christmas Carol, Scrooged. Your mileage may vary, as the man has acted in a ton of stuff, but that's where he always stood out to me. William Hickey is another name that you may not know off the top of your head, but you've seen the face and heard the voice. I knew him growing up as Carlton Blanchard from Wings of all things, but I think the consensus would almost certainly be Lewis from Christmas Vacation.
They want you to say the blessing,
or the voice of the evil scientist in A Nightmare Before Christmas. The two are able to make a simple premise, out of a 12-page short story no less, a fun and engaging killer cat story that does not end well for either man. The special effects here are again top-notch, particularly with the show-stopping cat ingestion scene. Johansen, for his part, starts off as a cool and collected hitman, but very quickly falls apart emotionally as his attempts continue to fail, and the demon cat slowly chips away at him both physically and mentally. It feels every bit as brief as the 12-page short story it's based on, but still is also able to take up its third or so of the movie. It would also have fit really well into an interesting 70s anthology all about various cats called The Uncanny. The third and final story has an interesting take on love and promises, with 80s regulars Ray Don Chong and Dexter's dad and Warrior alumni James Remar. Remar is a struggling artist who witnesses a gargoyle-type monster murder someone before he runs into a woman who changes his life in more ways than one. While the overall story here is a tad generic, it fits in perfectly with the feel of the other two and shows gore and other effects in just the right ways. While my least favorite of the three stories, it probably has the most heart and the best acting of the bunch. The wraparound is harmless enough and almost feels right out of the TV show, with the strange pairing of Debbie Harry as the witch and a young Matthew Lawrence as a stand-in for Hansel about to be eaten. He reads her the stories out of the book called, well, Tales from the Darkside, to buy time, and is the only character that gets a happy ending.
Don't you just love happy endings?
The movie did well enough, taking in $16 million on a $3.5 million budget, while also getting about as middle-of-the-pack reviews as you can get, with a C average and 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's low by about 20%, but it's not a ton of reviews behind it either. There were actually plans for a sequel that was greenlit in October of 1990, just about 5 months after the release of the first film, but it eventually fell through. A shame really, as the writer of the first and last story had already written a screenplay with George Romero again, this time based off a story by Robert Bloch of Psycho fame, and another 2 stories from Stephen King, Pinfall and Rainy Season. The movie is currently available on HBO Max, as well as YouTube or Prime for a fee. Or, if you're a physical media nut like most of us horror fans are, you can pick up the Barebones DVD for about $5. The best way to experience this movie is with the still-in-print Scream Factory Collector's Edition Blu-ray. It pairs well with the show if you want to own that too, and they do a bang-up job on all their releases.
I know what love is.
The sad part of all of this is that this is the last we would hear from anything to do with the franchise. It held the torch for anthology films and then passed it to a handful of 90s movies that varied in quality, before coming back strong in the 21st century.
When I was a little girl, this was my favorite book.
With Creepshow doing well for Shudder and heading into a 4th season, maybe there's hope that another streaming service will breathe life back into this property. But until then, spread the word and rewatch this absolute classic, or better yet, show it to a friend. And make sure you show them that damn creepy TV show intro.
A dark side.
The most important part of your life was the time that you spent with these people.